decision today that someone else engineered. You think it was yours. That is exactly what they needed you to think. The most powerful influence is the kind you never feel. No pressure, no ask, no obvious move. Silent. Already done before you noticed. 7 tactics, the ones running on you right now. Think about the last time you changed your mind about something. A decision you were certain about, and then something shifted. A conversation, something you read, a room you walked into. And somewhere in that exchange, your position moved. Here is the question most men never ask. Did you actually change your mind? Or did someone change it for you without your awareness? Most men believe they are resistant to influence. Research consistently shows the opposite. The men who are most certain they cannot be manipulated are statistically the easiest to move. Because certainty closes the part of the mind that would otherwise notice what is happening. In 2026, this is not a philosophical question anymore. It is an engineering problem. The platforms you use every day have teams of behavioral scientists, machine learning systems, and hundreds of millions of data points about what moves people like you. They are not guessing. They are running documented psychological tactics at scale, automatically on every interaction you have with their systems. And the men who built the most influential companies and movements of the last decade used the same tactics in person, in rooms, in negotiations, long before any algorithm existed. These are not tricks. They are documented mechanisms of human influence that bypass the rational mind. And the only protection against them is knowing exactly how they work. 7 tactics. The silent ones. Starting now. Tactic 1. The frame. Here is something that happens in every significant conversation. Before a single argument is made, before a single fact is presented, someone establishes the frame. And whoever controls the frame controls the entire exchange. Not because they are smarter, because the frame determines which answers are even possible. Here is what this looks like in a negotiation you have probably been in. You are discussing a deal. The other side opens with one question. How do you want to structure the payment terms? That question sounds neutral. It is not neutral. It has already assumed the deal is happening. The only variable now is structure. Your brain, which is extraordinarily efficient, accepts the frame and starts working inside it. You begin thinking about payment structures. The question of whether to do the deal at all has been quietly removed from the room. That is frame control. One question, no pressure, no argument, and the entire conversation now runs on their terms. Robert Cialdini at Arizona State University has studied influence for 4 decades. His research on persuasion, published in 2016 and expanded significantly in 2025 through follow-up studies at Arizona State, identified what he calls the privileged moment. The moment just before communication begins is more powerful than the communication itself. What a person is thinking about in the seconds before they receive information determines how they will process that information. Set the frame before the conversation, and you have set the filter through which everything else will be interpreted. The dark side of missing this. In 2026, every search query you type is a frame. Google, ChatGPT, every platform you use for information receives your question and returns answers inside the frame your question created. If you ask the wrong question, you get the right answer to the wrong problem. The men who built these systems know this. They also know that most people never examine the question itself. They only evaluate the answers. The application is direct. Before any significant conversation, ask yourself one question before you ask anything else. Who set the frame here? And is it mine? If you cannot answer that clearly, the frame belongs to someone else, and you are working inside their constraints while believing you're thinking freely. Think about a meeting you've been in where you agreed to something and felt good about agreeing to it, and a week later you realized the thing you agreed to was not what you thought you were deciding. That is not a memory failure. That is the frame doing what it was designed to do. You answered the question you were given. Nobody asked you the question you needed to answer, and once you see how the frame works, the next tactic shows you something even harder to detect. Tactic 2. Strategic vulnerability. Most men believe that strength is what creates trust, competence, confidence, certainty. Show strength, gain trust. Here is what actually happens. You're in a first meeting with someone you need to work with. They are polished, prepared. They have an answer for everything. The meeting ends. You leave with a feeling you cannot quite name. Something was slightly off. Not dishonest. Just sealed. Like nothing real was in the room. Now think about a different meeting. Same stakes. Different person. 15 minutes in, they say something you did not expect. We almost did not get this right. We had a version of this that completely failed about 18 months ago. Here is what we learned from it. Suddenly, the room changed. Not because they became less capable, because they became real. Your trust moved toward them faster than any credential could have moved it. That is strategic vulnerability, the deliberate, controlled disclosure of a weakness or failure that creates authentic connection faster than any demonstration of strength. Dr. Brené Brown at the University of Houston has studied this for 2 decades. Her research findings are consistent and significant. Vulnerability, when used deliberately and in the right context, does not reduce perceived competence. It increases it, because it signals that the person is secure enough to acknowledge imperfection. And security is what people are actually evaluating when they decide whether to trust someone. The critical word is strategic. This is not random self-disclosure. It is not weakness performed for sympathy. It is a specific, chosen moment of genuine acknowledgement that costs you something small and gains you something significant. The failure is real. The timing is chosen. The vulnerability was authentic. The use of it is deliberate. Here is the dark side. The men who use this against you have mastered the appearance of strategic vulnerability without the substance. They disclose something that feels personal but costs them nothing. They seem open while revealing nothing that actually matters. It produces the same neurological response in you, the same trust signal without any of the genuine risk. This is why charismatic manipulators are so effective. They seem more real than anyone else in the room, because they have learned to perform realness with precision. The protection is specific. When someone discloses a vulnerability that moves you quickly, ask one question internally. What did that disclosure actually cost them? If the answer is nothing, the move was engineered. Here is what this looks like in 2026 specifically. The most effective AI-powered sales and recruiting tools are now trained to open interactions with what appears to be institutional vulnerability. We know our product is not perfect for everyone. We have had clients who switched away and came back. Here is what they told us. That disclosure is real. It is also curated. Every word of it was selected because the data showed it converts hesitant buyers better than any feature presentation. The vulnerability is genuine. The use of it is engineered. Your trust response does not distinguish between the two, which is why understanding the mechanism matters more than evaluating the sincerity. And strategic vulnerability works in one direction. The next tactic works in silence. Tactic 3, the half question. This is one of the oldest influence tactics documented in negotiation psychology. And it is almost invisible until you know exactly what to look for. Here is how it works. You are in a conversation where something important is being discussed. A deal, a decision, a relationship dynamic that matters. The other person asks you a question, not a full question. A question that opens something and then stops. So what do you think about the timeline on this? And then they say nothing. They wait. Most men, within 4 to 6 seconds, begin talking. Not because they have processed the question. Because the silence is uncomfortable, and the brain interprets silence after a question as social pressure. And in filling the silence, they reveal far more than the question asked for. They reveal their actual position, their concerns, their hesitations, the things they were planning to hold back until later in the conversation. The half question is a tool for extracting information without pressure. No interrogation. No confrontation. Just a question and a silence that does the rest. FBI negotiation trainer Chris Voss documented this extensively in high-stakes interrogation and hostage negotiation contexts. His finding after 24 years of documented cases is direct. Calibrated questions followed by silence extract more accurate information than any direct questioning technique. Because the person filling the silence is choosing what to reveal, and what they choose reveals what they are trying to manage. Here is what 2026 added to this. AI customer service systems, sales platforms, and even AI-powered recruiting tools now use calibrated open questions followed by deliberate response delays. Not because a human decided to pause, because the system was trained on millions of interactions and learned that the pause after a specific type of question increases information disclosure significantly. The tactic is now automated, running at scale on every interaction you have with these systems. You fill the silence. The system records everything you reveal. That information is used in every subsequent interaction with you. The protection. When someone asks a question and goes silent, notice it. You do not have to fill the silence. You're allowed to think. You're allowed to ask a clarifying question instead of answering. You're allowed to say this out loud. Let me think about that for a moment. The pressure to fill silence is a trained social response. It is not a requirement. The men who understand this use it both ways. They resist the pressure to fill silence when it is used against them, and they ask the half question and hold the silence when they need to understand what someone is actually managing. The next tactic is about something even more basic than silence. It is about sequence. Tactic 4, the contrast principle. Your brain does not evaluate anything in absolute terms. It evaluates everything in relation to what came immediately before it. Here is what this looks like in a real scenario you have probably experienced without naming it. You are negotiating a price. The other side opens with a number that is significantly higher than you expected. You react. You push back. You negotiate. You land somewhere in the middle and feel like you won something. Here is what actually happened. The first number was not a real offer. It was a frame. Its only purpose was to make every number that came after it feel reasonable by comparison. The number you landed on was where they wanted to be from the beginning. You experienced the contrast and called it a negotiation. Robert Cialdini documented this as one of the most consistent and powerful principles of human influence. The contrast effect operates automatically and below conscious awareness. Present something large before something medium, and the medium feels small. Present something difficult before something simple, and the simple feels easy. Present something extreme before something reasonable, and the reasonable becomes the obvious choice. It works in every domain. In hiring, show a candidate a role with impossible requirements before showing them the actual role. In relationships, describe an extreme version of what you want before describing what you actually want. In leadership, set the hardest possible expectation before revealing the real expectation. In every case, the contrast does the persuasion. No argument required. The dark side in 2026. Every major e-commerce platform, every subscription service, every pricing page you encounter is engineered around contrast. The most expensive tier exists primarily to make the middle tier feel reasonable. The original price exists primarily to make the sale price feel like a gain. You're not evaluating the actual value of what you are buying. You are evaluating it against the contrast that was placed in front of you first. And that contrast was put there by a team whose only job is to make the middle option feel inevitable. The protection is a single question. Before any decision, ask, what was I shown just before this option, and why was I shown that first? Answer that question honestly, and the contrast dissolves. You are now evaluating the actual option, not the contrast. If an offer has ever felt reasonable, and you realize later it was only reasonable compared to what came first, subscribe to Dark Architect. This is exactly what we break down every week. The button is right there. Tactic 5. Mirroring under pressure. The next tactic operates in real time, in person, and most men do it without knowing they are doing it. In 2025, researchers at Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Milan published findings in Frontiers in Neuroscience on what happens neurologically when two people are in a high-stakes persuasion or negotiation context. They used EEG headsets to measure brain activity in both participants simultaneously. What they found was direct and significant. When one person successfully influenced another, their brain activity patterns synchronized, not metaphorically, measurably, neurologically. The brain of the person being influenced began mirroring the activity patterns of the person doing the influencing. And this synchronization happened before the influenced person was consciously aware of changing their position. The influence preceded the awareness of being influenced. Here is what this looks like in practice. You're in a tense conversation. Something is being negotiated or disputed. The other person, instead of arguing back, begins doing something subtle. They slow their speech to match yours. They use a word you just used, not paraphrasing the exact word. They let their posture settle into something that resembles what your body is doing. None of this is visible as a tactic. It just feels like the conversation is going better than expected. The tension in the room drops slightly, and you find yourself more open to their position than you were 4 minutes ago. You attribute it to their argument. It wasn't their argument. It was the synchronization. Chris Voss called this technique mirroring in negotiation contexts. The instruction is almost absurdly simple. Repeat the last 3 words of what someone just said in a slightly lower tone, and then go silent. The other person almost always continues talking, elaborating, revealing more. Because hearing their own words reflected back creates a sense of being understood. And the sense of being understood drops resistance faster than any logical argument. Here is the pressure version. When the conversation gets difficult, most men escalate. Their voice gets harder, their posture closes, their language becomes more definitive. The man who knows mirroring does the opposite. He gets quieter. He matches the rhythm of the other person. He reflects their language back, and the escalation has nowhere to go. Because you cannot fight someone who keeps giving you yourself. The dark side. Every AI conversational system you interact with in 2026 is trained on mirroring principles. Customer service bots, AI sales tools, AI coaches. They are all designed to reflect your language back to you in ways that create the neurological sense of being understood. You feel heard. You lower your resistance. You make the decision they were built to move you toward. And you attribute it to your own reasoning. Here is the specific counter move when you notice mirroring being used on you. Change your language deliberately. Introduce a word or phrase that is different from what you have been using. If the other person immediately adopts your new language, you have confirmed the mirroring, and you now know you are in a managed interaction. Not necessarily a dishonest one, but a deliberate one. And knowing it is deliberate gives you back your agency. You can choose how much to be moved and how much to hold. That choice was always yours. Mirroring just temporarily obscured it. The next tactic has nothing to do with words. It is about how you move through a room. Tactic 6. The slow exit. Most men think about how they enter a room. The handshake, the eye contact, the first impression. They almost never think about how they leave. Here is what leaving communicates. When you end a conversation and immediately move to the next thing, you signal that the conversation was one of many, that it was a transaction, that the other person was a stop on a list. The interaction shrinks in their memory. When you end a conversation slowly, you communicate something different. You pause before you go. You let there be a moment of stillness before the next movement. You are not rushed. You are not immediately elsewhere. And in that pause, the other person experiences something they do not experience often. The sense that they were the full attention, that there was nowhere else to be, that the conversation actually mattered. This is not performed warmth. It is the deliberate management of how you close every significant interaction. There is documented psychology behind why this works. The peak end rule, researched extensively by Daniel Kahneman at Princeton, shows that people do not remember experiences as a whole. They remember 2 moments, the most intense point and how it ended. Everything in between fades significantly. This means that the last 30 seconds of any significant interaction carries more memory weight than the preceding hour. The man who understands the peak end rule is not thinking about the conversation. He is thinking about the exit. Because the exit is what gets remembered. It is what determines whether they call you first next time, whether they trust you in the room they are in after they leave you, whether the interaction grows or shrinks in their mind over the following 48 hours. The slow exit applied to negotiation is even more specific. When you have reached a significant moment in a deal or discussion, do not immediately move to the next agenda item. Let the moment exist for a few seconds. Let the other person sit in what just happened. Their brain needs time to encode it. Rushed exits from significant moments prevent that encoding. The moment feels smaller than it was. The slow exit lets it land. The dark psychology application. When you want to leave a lasting impression in any room, the exit is where you make it. The conversation itself is context. The exit is the final image. And the final image is what their memory keeps. Here is what this looks like in a workplace context in 2026. Most meetings end the same way. Someone says a version of, "Okay, great, let us follow up," and the room disperses. Everyone immediately moves to their phone or their next thing. The meeting shrinks in memory within minutes. The man who understands the peak-end rule does something different. Before he leaves, he pauses. He makes one specific observation about something that was said. Not a summary, a real observation. Something he actually noticed. That moment becomes the peak. His exit is the end. Those two things are what the other people in the room remember about the interaction, not the 45 minutes that preceded them. And the last tactic is the most important one for right now in 2026, because it is not being done by a person. Tactic 7. Algorithmic framing. Every tactic we have covered so far has been used by people for centuries. The frame, strategic vulnerability, the half question, contrast, mirroring, the slow exit. These are human influence techniques documented across history, refined by practitioners, studied by researchers. Here is what changed in the last 5 years and accelerated dramatically in 2026. These tactics are now running automatically, at scale, on you, right now. The World Economic Forum Global Risks Report, published in early 2026, placed cognitive manipulation through AI systems as one of the top global risks over both short and long time horizons. Not eventually. Now, here is the specific mechanism. The platforms you use have identified through hundreds of millions of data points which psychological tactics move, which types of people in which emotional states. They know your type. They have categorized your behavioral patterns more accurately than most people who know you personally. And they are running the appropriate influence sequence on every piece of content you see. The feed you scroll is not a random collection of content. It is a curated sequence of frames, contrast effects, and emotional priming designed to keep you in a specific psychological state. That state is the one in which you are most likely to engage, most likely to react, most likely to stay. Not the state in which you think most clearly. Not the state in which you make your best decisions. The state in which you are most useful to the platform. Here is the specific tactic being run. They show you something that activates anger or anxiety. Your emotional state elevates. In an elevated emotional state, the rational filtering that would normally evaluate the next piece of content is partially offline. Now they show you the content they want you to engage with. It slides past your defenses because your defenses are busy processing the previous activation. This is contrast and emotional priming running simultaneously, automatically, on every scroll. B.J. Fogg at Stanford University studied persuasive technology for decades. He identified the core principle that every major platform was built on. Behavior happens when motivation, ability, and a trigger converge at the same moment. The platforms have engineered all three simultaneously for every user, on every interaction. They do not need to persuade you with arguments. They just need to get your motivation, ability, and trigger aligned at the right moment. And they have enough data to know when that moment is for you specifically. The dark side is not that they are doing this. The dark side is that most men believe they are immune to it. They scroll and believe they are choosing. They react and believe it was their reaction. They engage and believe it was their decision. The protection is structural, not psychological. Willpower does not work against a system with more data about you than you have about yourself. Structure works. Time-boxed access, notification removal, specific contexts for specific content. You cannot outthink a system optimized to outthink you. You can only change the conditions under which it has access to you. The men who understand all 7 tactics are operating in a different world from the men who do not. Not because they are more intelligent, because they can see the architecture of what is being run on them. And seeing it is the only thing that changes it. Here is what changes when you understand all 7. You walk into a negotiation and someone opens with a number that is designed to anchor your expectations. You see the frame before you respond to it. You do not negotiate inside their constraint. You reset the frame and then negotiate. Someone discloses a vulnerability that moves you faster than anything else in the conversation. You notice the speed. You ask internally what that disclosure actually cost them. You stay present without lowering your guard. A question is asked and then silence falls. You do not fill it. You let the silence sit. You think. And then you respond to what was actually asked, not to the pressure of the pause. Someone mirrors your language in a difficult moment, and the tension drops. You notice it working, you appreciate the skill, and you are not moved by it further than you choose to be moved. You scroll a feed and notice the emotional sequence. Activation, then content, activation, then content. You see the architecture, and you decide when to close the application based on your agenda, not theirs. This is not paranoia. This is literacy, the same way that a man who understands accounting reads a financial statement differently from one who does not. A man who understands influence reads every room, every conversation, every interaction differently. He is not more suspicious, he is more accurate. The 7 tactics do not stop running on you when you learn them, but they stop running without your awareness, and awareness is where your agency begins. Start this week with 1 tactic: the frame. In every significant conversation, before you respond to anything, ask yourself 1 question. Who set the frame here? And is it mine? That single question will show you more about how influence actually works than any book on persuasion ever written. The next video is already loaded. It covers the psychology of how the most powerful men become psychologically untouchable. Specifically how they build the internal structure that makes them impossible to destabilize regardless of what comes at them. Watch it now. Subscribe to Dark Architect. Every week we break down the exact mechanics behind how power, influence, and human behavior actually operate. No motivation, no fluff, just the mechanism. The most dangerous influence is the kind you never felt. Now you feel it. Now you can choose.